The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach as it thundered away, leaving Eleanor Sinclair standing alone on the dirt road with her two worn leather trunks at her feet, and the sinking realization that the driver had deposited her in the wrong town entirely. She had paid good money to reach Carson City, Nevada, where her cousin Margaret ran a boarding house and had promised her respectable work. But the faded sign creaking in the hot wind read Panamint, California in peeling letters, and the ramshackle collection of buildings sprawling before her looked nothing like the descriptions in Margaret's letters. The year was 1875, and Eleanor had traveled all the way from Philadelphia with every penny she owned sewn into the lining of her coat, fleeing a marriage arrangement to a cruel banker twice her age that her father had orchestrated before his death, left her an orphan at 22. Now she stood in this God-forsaken mining town in the middle of nowhere, watching the stagecoach disappear into the shimmering heat, her carefully laid plans crumbling like the sun-baked earth beneath her boots. The main street stretched before her, lined with weathered buildings that looked like they had been thrown together hastily during better days and left to rot in the desert heat. A saloon stood on one corner, its doors swinging lazily in the breeze, tinny piano music drifting out along with raucous laughter. Across from it, a general store sagged under the weight of its own false front, and farther down she could make out what might have been a hotel, though the sign was too faded to read. Men loitered in the shade of overhangs, their eyes tracking her with an interest that made her skin crawl beneath her travel-stained dress. She had read enough dime novels to know that a woman alone in a mining town was inviting the worst kind of attention. Eleanor picked up the smaller of her two trunks, gritting her teeth against the weight, and began dragging it toward what she hoped was the hotel. The larger trunk would have to wait. Sweat trickled down her back despite the late afternoon hour, and she could feel the sun burning through her bonnet. She had made it perhaps 10 yards when a shadow fell across her path. That stagecoach left you in a real hurry. She looked up to find a man standing before her, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty work clothes, a battered hat pushed back on dark hair that needed cutting, and there was something in his stance that suggested he knew how to handle the gun belt slung low on his hips. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble, and a mouth that looked like it might smile easily under different circumstances. The driver said this was Carson City, Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. I have a ticket that clearly states Carson City, Nevada. The man's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his features. Carson City is a good 150 miles northeast of here. Panamint is not anywhere close to being on the way there. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. That cannot be right. He assured me this was my stop. Then he either cannot read a map or he was paid to drop you here specific-like. The man glanced down the street, and Eleanor followed his gaze to see several rough-looking miners watching their exchange with obvious interest. Either way, standing in the middle of the street with your belongings is not the smartest thing you could be doing right now. This town has gone downhill since the silver started running thin. I can see that, Eleanor said, trying to maintain her dignity despite the panic rising in her chest. Is there a sheriff's office? I need to report what happened and arrange for proper transportation. The man actually laughed at that, though there was no humor in it. The sheriff lit out 3 weeks ago when the mine owners stopped paying his salary. We have got a judge who passes through once a month if we are lucky, but that is about it for law around here. He studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. My name is Isaac Garrett. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Not much, but it is honest work and I keep to myself mostly." "Eleanor Sinclair," she replied automatically, then immediately wished she had not given her real name. But there was something in Isaac Garrett's eyes that made her think he was not the sort to take advantage of a woman in distress, even in a lawless town like this one. "Miss Sinclair, I am going to be plain with you because I do not think you understand the situation you are in. Panamint is dying. The mines are playing out, most of the decent folks have moved on, and what is left is mostly men with nothing to lose and nowhere else to go. The saloon and the gambling halls are about the only businesses still running, and they cater to a rough crowd. A woman alone here is going to attract the kind of attention that ends badly." "I have money," Eleanor said, though her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. "Surely I can pay someone to take me to Carson City." "Maybe," Isaac said, though he did not sound convinced. "Problem is, most of the men here would rather rob you than help you, and the few who might be trustworthy do not have the means to make a journey like that. The stage comes through once a week if we are lucky, but given that the last driver dumped you here, I would not count on them being much help." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had not cried when her father died, had not cried when her aunt told her she would have to marry Mr. Blackwell or be turned out onto the streets, had not cried during the long, uncomfortable journey west. She was not about to cry now in front of a stranger in the middle of a dying mining town. "Then what do you suggest I do, Mr. Garrett?" she asked, hearing the edge in her own voice. Isaac looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weighing something in his mind. Finally, he sighed and picked up her larger trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Right now, I suggest you let me help you get your things somewhere safe before those miners over there work up the courage to come over here. We can figure out the rest after that." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle things herself, but she was not a fool. She could feel the eyes on her, could sense the danger Isaac was warning her about. So she nodded and followed him down the dusty street, carrying her smaller trunk and wondering how her carefully planned escape had gone so terribly wrong. Isaac led her to the hotel, which turned out to be even more depressing up close than it had looked from a distance. The building leaned slightly to one side, and several of the windows were cracked or missing panes entirely. Inside, the lobby smelled of old tobacco and something she could not quite identify but suspected was mold. A man with greasy hair and suspicious eyes looked up from behind a scarred wooden counter. "Need a room for the lady," Isaac said, setting down Eleanor's trunk with a thud. The clerk looked Eleanor up and down in a way that made her want to wrap her arms around herself. "Rooms are $2 a night, payment in advance. Extra if she wants hot water or clean sheets." "That is robbery," Eleanor protested. "That is Panamint," the clerk replied with a gap-toothed grin. Isaac pulled some coins from his pocket and slapped them on the counter. "3 nights, with hot water and clean sheets. And if I hear that anyone has bothered Miss Sinclair or tried to get into her room, I will come back here, and we will have a conversation you will not enjoy." The clerk's grin faded. He knew Isaac, Eleanor realized, and more importantly, he was afraid of him. That was interesting, and she filed the information away for later consideration. "Room 5, top of the stairs," the clerk muttered, handing over a tarnished key. Eleanor wanted to protest Isaac paying for her room, but she also knew she needed to conserve her resources until she figured out what to do next. She followed him up the narrow staircase, which creaked ominously with each step, to a room that was small and spare but reasonably clean. The bed looked like it had seen better days, but the sheets appeared freshly washed, and there was a pitcher and basin on a rickety table by the window. Isaac set her trunk down and turned to face her. Keep your door locked and do not go out after dark. The saloon crowd gets rowdy, and like I said, there is no law here to speak of. Why are you helping me? Eleanor asked suddenly. You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a criminal fleeing justice. Are you? No. Then I am helping you because it is the right thing to do, and because I remember what it is like to be alone in a place where you do not belong. Something shadowed his expression for just a moment, some old pain that he clearly had no intention of sharing. Get some rest. I will come by tomorrow morning and we can figure out your options. In the meantime, stay inside and stay safe. He was gone before Eleanor could respond, his boots echoing on the stairs and then fading into silence. She locked the door behind him, checked the window to make sure it was secure, and then finally allowed herself to sink onto the bed. The enormity of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She was stranded in a dying town with no clear way forward, dependent on the kindness of a cowboy she had just met, and running out of both money and options. But Eleanor Sinclair had not come all this way to give up now. She would figure something out. She always did. She spent the evening inventorying her belongings and counting her money. After paying for her ticket west and various expenses along the way, she had $73 and some change left. That was not enough to get her far, especially not if hotels in this God-forsaken territory were charging $2 a night. She needed a plan, and she needed it quickly. As darkness fell, the sounds from the street grew louder. Shouting, laughter, the occasional gunshot that made her jump. She wedged a chair under the door handle for extra security, and lay on top of the covers fully clothed, sleep coming in fitful patches between the noise outside and her own anxious thoughts. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through the grimy window. Eleanor washed as best she could with the lukewarm water in the pitcher, changed into her least wrinkled dress, and tried to make herself look presentable. She was pinning up her auburn hair when she heard boots on the stairs, followed by a firm knock on her door. Miss Sinclair. It is Isaac Garrett. She removed the chair and opened the door to find him standing there with a cloth-wrapped bundle in his hands. He looked like he had cleaned up since yesterday, his face freshly shaved and his hair damp as though he had dunked his head in a water trough. Figured you might not have eaten, he said, holding out the bundle. It is not much, but the widow Henderson makes decent biscuits. Eleanor accepted the bundle, surprised to find it still warm. Inside were 3 large biscuits, some strips of bacon, and what looked like a hard-boiled egg. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she had not eaten since the day before yesterday. "Thank you," she said, stepping back to let him into the room. It was not entirely proper, but propriety seemed like a luxury she could not afford at the moment. Isaac leaned against the wall while she ate, and she appreciated that he did not watch her wolf down the food. When she had finished, wiping crumbs from her lips with as much dignity as she could muster, he spoke. "I have been thinking about your situation. The next stage is not due for 5 more days, and even then, there is no guarantee they will take you where you need to go. I asked around this morning, and no one in town is willing to make the trip to Carson City. It is too far, too dangerous, and frankly, most of them cannot be trusted anyway." Eleanor's heart sank. "So what am I supposed to do? Stay here indefinitely?" "No," Isaac said slowly. "I have another idea, but you might not like it. I am listening. My ranch is outside of town, like I said. It is not much, just me and about 30 horses, but it is safe and far enough from Panamint that you would not have to worry about the riffraff bothering you. You could stay there while I figure out how to get you to Carson City. I have got to make a trip to Independence in a few weeks to deliver some horses. From there, we could arrange better transportation north." Eleanor stared at him. "You are suggesting I stay at your ranch, alone with you?" "I know how it sounds," Isaac said, and she could see color rising in his tanned cheeks. "But I give you my word as a gentleman that you would be safe. There is a small cabin on the property that my foreman used to stay in before he moved on. You could have that, and I would keep to the main house. It is not a perfect solution, but it is better than staying here." "Why would you do this?" Eleanor asked. "You have already paid for my room and brought me breakfast. You do not owe me anything." Isaac was quiet for a moment, his green eyes thoughtful. "My mother was widowed when I was 12. She tried to make it on her own, but people took advantage of her. By the time I was old enough to help properly, she was sick from working herself into the ground and died that winter. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone who needed it, I would. Besides," he added with a slight smile that transformed his serious face, "it gets lonely out there talking to horses all day. The company might be nice." Eleanor weighed her options. She could stay in this terrible hotel, spending money she could not afford while waiting for a stagecoach that might never come or might dump her in the wrong place again. She could try to make her own way to Carson City, though Isaac had made it clear how dangerous that would be. Or she could trust this stranger who had shown her nothing but kindness and take a chance. "If I agree," she said carefully, "I would want to work for my keep. I am not a charity case, Mr. Garrett. I can cook and clean, and I am good with numbers if you need help with your books." Something like respect flickered in Isaac's expression. "Fair enough. I will not lie and say the place could not use a woman's touch. I am a decent hand with horses, but housekeeping is not exactly my strong suit." "Then I accept," Eleanor said, making the decision before she could talk herself out of it. "When would we leave?" "As soon as you are ready. I have got my wagon outside." Eleanor packed her belongings quickly, and within an hour they were rattling out of Panamint in a sturdy wagon pulled by two solid-looking horses. She watched the sorry collection of buildings disappear behind them with no regret whatsoever. Isaac sat beside her on the bench seat, handling the reins with easy competence, and she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all sharp angles and lean muscle, with capable hands and a quiet confidence that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. She had known plenty of men back in Philadelphia, sons of her father's business associates, polished and educated and utterly boring. Isaac Garrett was nothing like them. There was something solid about him, something real, and she found herself curious about the story behind those thoughtful green eyes. The ranch, when they reached it after an hour's drive through increasingly beautiful country, was modest but well-maintained. The main house was a simple wooden structure with a covered porch, and nearby stood a barn, a corral with several horses, and the smaller cabin Isaac had mentioned. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing, and the air smelled of sage and dust, and something indefinably wild. "It is not much," Isaac said, and she could hear uncertainty in his voice, as if he suddenly worried she might find it inadequate. "It is wonderful," Eleanor said honestly. After the claustrophobic griminess of Panamint, the open spaces and clean air felt like a blessing. "Truly." Isaac smiled, a real smile this time that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Eleanor felt something flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was just relief at being somewhere safe. He showed her the cabin, which was small but clean, with a bed, a stove, a table and chair, and even some shelves on the wall. "I will bring over some supplies," he said. "There is a well between here and the main house, and the outhouse is around back. If you need anything, just holler or come over." Eleanor spent the rest of the day settling in, which did not take long given her limited possessions. Isaac brought over food supplies, blankets, and even some wildflowers in a jar that made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. When evening came, he invited her to the main house for supper, and she accepted, partly because she was hungry and partly because she was curious to see how he lived. The main house was exactly what she would have expected from a bachelor rancher. The furniture was sparse and practical. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, and there were dust bunnies in the corners that made her fingers itch for a broom. But there were also books on a shelf, good books, and a fiddle hanging on the wall. And the view from the window looked out over the mountains in a way that made her understand why someone would choose to live out here alone. Isaac cooked steaks over the fire, and they ate with potatoes and canned beans, and Eleanor could not remember the last time food had tasted so good. They talked carefully, two strangers feeling out the boundaries of their unexpected arrangement. She told him about Philadelphia, about her father's death and her narrow escape from an unwanted marriage, though she did not go into the details of Mr. Blackwell's cruelty, or the way her aunt had sold her future for a settlement of debts. He told her about growing up in California, about learning to train horses from an old vaquero, about saving for years to buy this land and build something of his own. "You ever get lonely?" Eleanor asked as darkness fell outside the windows. "Sometimes," Isaac admitted. "But lonely is better than being around the wrong people. I had enough of that in my younger days." She wanted to ask what he meant, but she could see the shutters come down in his expression, and she let it go. They had time. If she was going to be here for a few weeks, they had plenty of time to learn each other's stories. That first night in the cabin, Eleanor lay in bed listening to the sounds of the desert. Coyotes howled in the distance, insects chirped, and the wind rustled through the sage. It was so different from the city sounds she had grown up with, but somehow it felt right. She thought about Isaac in the main house, probably reading by lamplight or playing that fiddle, and she felt safer than she had in months. The days developed a rhythm. Eleanor woke early and made breakfast in her little cabin, then walked over to the main house where she would find Isaac already working with the horses. She took over the cooking and cleaning without discussion, and he accepted her help without complaint. In the afternoons, she would work on mending his shirts or organizing his chaotic collection of papers, and he taught her about the horses, showing her how to approach them, how to read their moods, how to gain their trust. "Horses are honest," Isaac told her one afternoon as they stood by the corral watching a young mare prance nervously. "They do not lie or pretend. If they are scared, they show it. If they trust you, they show that too. I have always found that refreshing." "People could learn something from that," Eleanor observed. "They could," Isaac agreed, giving her a sidelong look that made her wonder if he was talking about something specific. She found herself watching him as he worked. He moved with an easy grace, confident and competent, and there was something mesmerizing about the way he gentled the horses, his voice low and soothing, his hands firm but never cruel. She noticed the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, the way the sun caught the dark of his hair, the way he smiled when he thought no one was watching. And she told herself firmly that noticing was not the same as being interested, that she was simply observing the man who had helped her, nothing more. But the truth was harder to ignore than she wanted it to be. She liked Isaac Garrett. She liked his quiet competence, his dry humor, the way he treated her as an equal rather than a delicate ornament to be protected or controlled. She liked the sound of his laugh, which she heard more often as the days passed. She liked the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. And she was starting to suspect that he liked her too, though he was too much of a gentleman to say so. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded, something warm and wondering in his eyes that made her heart race. When he handed her tools or supplies, His fingers would linger just a moment longer than necessary. When they sat on the porch in the evenings, talking as the sun set over the mountains, he would lean slightly toward her, as if drawn by some invisible force. 2 weeks into her stay, Isaac took her riding. He saddled up his gelding and a sweet-tempered mare named Daisy, and they rode out into the desert in the early morning when the air was still cool. He showed her the boundaries of his property, pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the land and the people who had lived there before. They stopped by a creek to water the horses, and Eleanor found herself standing beside him in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the cloudless sky. "You are a good rider," Isaac observed. "Better than you let on at first." "My father kept horses when I was young," Eleanor admitted. "Before his business started failing and he had to sell them. I have not ridden in years, but I suppose some things you do not forget." "Like how to trust someone," Isaac said quietly. Eleanor looked at him sharply and found him watching her with those perceptive green eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you are still waiting for me to show my true colors, to reveal that I am just like whoever hurt you back in Philadelphia. And I get it, Eleanor. I do. People have given you reason not to trust, but I hope you know by now that I meant what I said. You are safe here." She felt tears sting her eyes at the unexpected tenderness in his voice. "I do know that," she said softly. "You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. I just do not understand why." Isaac reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm against her cheek, calloused and gentle. "Maybe I am starting to think that Stagecoach did not leave you in the wrong town after all," he said. "Maybe it left you exactly where you were meant to be." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the scent of leather and horse and something uniquely him. He was close enough to kiss, and for a wild moment she wanted him to, wanted to feel his mouth on hers, wanted to give in to the attraction that had been building between them since the day they met. But then reality crashed back in. She was supposed to be going to Carson City. She had plans, a future she had carefully constructed, a cousin waiting for her. And Isaac had his ranch, his life here in the middle of nowhere. Whatever was growing between them had no future, no matter how much she might wish otherwise. She stepped back, breaking the spell, and saw something like disappointment flicker across his face before he masked it. "We should head back," she said, hating the way her voice shook. "I promised to make stew for supper." They rode back in silence, the easy companionship of the morning replaced by a tension that made Eleanor's chest ache. She had hurt him, she realized, rejected something precious before it could fully bloom. But what choice did she have? She could not stay here forever, and she could not ask him to give up everything he had built for a woman he had known for only 2 weeks. That evening, Eleanor prepared supper in the main house while Isaac worked on paperwork at the table. The silence between them was different now, weighted with things unsaid. When she served the stew, their fingers brushed and she pulled away too quickly, sloshing gravy onto the table. She cleaned it up with shaking hands, feeling his eyes on her the whole time. "Eleanor," Isaac said finally, setting down his spoon. "I need to apologize. What I said earlier by the creek, that was out of line. You came here looking for help getting to Carson City, not for some cowboy to make declarations at you. I overstepped and I am sorry." "You did not overstep," Eleanor said quietly, still not looking at him. "You just said something I was not ready to hear. Because you do not feel the same way." Now she did look at him, and she saw vulnerability in his expression that made her heart clench. "Because I do not know what I feel," she admitted. "Everything has happened so fast. 3 weeks ago I was in Philadelphia preparing to run away from a marriage I did not want. 2 weeks ago, I was stranded in Panamint with no idea what to do next. And now I am here with you, and I feel things I did not expect to feel, and I do not know what to do with any of it." Isaac leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What do you want, Eleanor? Not what you think you should want, not what your plans say you should want, but what do you actually want?" It was a good question, and Eleanor did not have a good answer. She had spent so long focused on escape, on survival, on getting to safety, that she had not let herself think beyond that. What did she want? A home, security, someone who saw her as more than a burden or a commodity, respect, kindness, love. And when she was honest with herself, she wanted Isaac. She wanted his quiet strength and his dry humor and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. She wanted mornings working side by side and evenings on the porch watching the sunset. She wanted to hear him play that fiddle and learn all his stories and wake up beside him every day for the rest of her life. But wanting and having were two different things. "I want to not be afraid anymore," she finally said. "I want to make my own choices instead of having them made for me. And I want to stop running." "Then stop," Isaac said simply. "Stay here, not in the cabin as my charity case, but here with me as my partner. Help me build this ranch into something real. I know it is not much compared to what you are used to, but Eleanor, I swear I would spend every day trying to make you happy." "You barely know me," Eleanor whispered. "I know enough. I know you are brave and stubborn and smart as a whip. I know you make the best biscuits I have ever tasted, and you sing when you think no one is listening. I know you are gentle with the horses and you laugh at my terrible jokes. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out after a storm. And I know that I have been waiting my whole life for you. I just did not realize it until you showed up in Panamint with your trunks and your determination and your refusal to give up." Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Isaac, I do not even know if I can stay in this country. I might have to go back. Mr. Blackwell has connections, and if he finds out I ran, then we will deal with it together," Isaac interrupted. "Eleanor, I am not going to make you promises about everything being easy or perfect. Life out here is hard. But I can promise that I will stand beside you no matter what comes. If you want to go to Carson City, I will take you there myself. If you want to stay, I will thank God every day for my good fortune. But either way, I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. This is not some passing fancy or loneliness talking. I am falling in love with you, and I think you might feel the same way about me." She could not deny it, not when he was looking at her like that, not when her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "I am terrified," she confessed. "So am I," Isaac admitted with a crooked smile. "But maybe that means it is worth it." Eleanor made her decision in that moment, throwing caution to the wind and trusting her heart for the first time in years. She stood up, walked around the table, and kissed him. Isaac made a sound of surprise that turned into a groan as his arms came around her, pulling her close. His mouth was warm and sure against hers, tasting of coffee and promise, and Eleanor felt something inside her unlock and unfurl like a flower in the sun. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes?" "That is a maybe. We should see where this goes," Eleanor said, but she was smiling. "I am not making any promises yet, Isaac Garrett. You are going to have to court me properly." "I can do that," Isaac said, grinning in a way that made him look younger and lighter and absolutely devastating. "Fair warning, though, my courting skills are pretty rusty." "Then I guess you will have to practice," Eleanor said, and kissed him again. The weeks that followed were the happiest Eleanor could remember. Isaac courted her with wildflowers picked on his morning rides and terrible jokes that made her laugh despite herself. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her with his arms around hers as he showed her how to aim, and Eleanor pretended not to notice how his breath caught when her hair brushed his cheek. She cooked his favorite meals and mended his clothes and organized his entire house, while he protested that she did not have to, and then thanked her profusely when she was done. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Isaac told her about the father who had drunk himself to death, about the years he spent drifting and making bad choices before finding his way to this land and this life. Eleanor told him about her childhood, about her father's slow descent into debt and despair, about Mr. Blackwell's cold eyes and the promises of her cousin Margaret that had seemed like the only hope she had. "You ever regret not making it to Carson City?" Isaac asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "No," Eleanor said honestly. "Margaret is a good woman, but I would have been just another employee in her boarding house, scrubbing floors and changing sheets for the rest of my life. This is better. This feels like a future I actually want." Isaac took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I want you to stay, Eleanor, not just for a few weeks or until we figure out transportation. I want you to stay forever. Marry me." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Isaac, we have only known each other for 6 weeks. I know. And if you need more time, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need. But I also know what I feel, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build this ranch together. I want to fill that main house with kids and noise and love. I want to grow old sitting on this porch holding your hand. Say yes, Eleanor, or at least say you will think about it." Eleanor looked at him, this good man who had changed her life so completely, and felt the last of her fear melt away. She had spent so long being afraid, running from one bad situation only to nearly land in another. But Isaac was not Mr. Blackwell. He was not her father or any of the other men who had tried to control her. He was kind and patient, and he saw her as an equal. He made her laugh and challenged her mind and looked at her like she hung the moon. She loved him. She had known it for weeks, even if she had been too afraid to admit it. And love, she realized, was worth taking a risk for. "Yes," she said, and watched joy break across his face like sunrise. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaac let out a whoop that probably scared the horses and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, his hands cupping her face as if she were something infinitely precious. "We will do this right," he promised. "I will take you to Independence next week. We can get married by the justice of the peace there, and I will buy you a proper ring. It might not be much, but it will be real gold, I promise." "I do not need gold," Eleanor said, but she was touched by his determination. "I just need you." They traveled to Independence the following week, and Eleanor got her first real look at civilization since leaving Panamint. The town was bigger, cleaner, more settled, with actual law enforcement and respectable businesses. They stayed in separate rooms at a proper hotel, and Isaac took her to dinner at a restaurant with tablecloths and silverware. The next morning, they stood before Justice Morrison in his office, with his wife and clerk as witnesses, and exchanged vows. Isaac had kept his promise about the ring. It was simple gold, but it fit perfectly, and Eleanor found herself staring at it in wonder as the justice pronounced them husband and wife. When Isaac kissed her, she felt the last piece of herself settle into place. She was no longer Eleanor Sinclair, running from her past. She was Eleanor Garrett, standing firmly in her present and looking forward to her future. They consummated their marriage that night in the hotel, and Eleanor discovered that the passion she felt for Isaac was matched by his own. He was gentle and patient, concerned with her comfort, and she fell asleep in his arms feeling cherished and complete. The trip back to the ranch felt different. She was going home now, truly home, to a place where she belonged. They stopped by Panamint briefly, so Eleanor could send a letter to her cousin Margaret explaining the change in plans, and she felt nothing but relief to be leaving the sorry town behind again. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor threw herself into making the main house a home, sewing curtains for the windows and planting a vegetable garden, and even painting the porch furniture a cheerful blue. Isaac worked with the horses, breaking and training them for sale, and business was good. Word spread about the quality of his stock, and ranchers came from miles around to buy from him. They learned each other's rhythms and quirks. Eleanor discovered that Isaac was grumpy in the mornings until he had coffee, that he hummed while he worked, that he had a secret sweet tooth for molasses cookies. Isaac learned that Eleanor talked to herself when she was concentrating, that she was fiercely protective of the chickens she had convinced him to buy, that she had nightmares sometimes about her old life and needed him to hold her until she felt safe again. They had their first real fight 3 months after the wedding, over something stupid that Eleanor could not even remember later. She had said something sharp. Isaac had responded in kind, and before they knew it, they were shouting at each other across the kitchen. Eleanor had stormed out to the barn, Isaac had gone to work on the fence line, and they had spent 2 miserable hours avoiding each other before Isaac appeared in the barn doorway looking sheepish. "I am sorry," he said. "I was being stubborn." "I am sorry too," Eleanor admitted. "I was being unreasonable." They met in the middle and held each other, and Eleanor realized that even their fights felt different from anything she had experienced before. There was no cruelty, no attempt to wound or control. Just 2 people working through their differences and choosing to come back together. "We are going to be okay," Isaac murmured into her hair. "I know," Eleanor said, and meant it. Winter came, bringing cold nights and the occasional snowfall that dusted the mountains white. They spent long evenings by the fire, Eleanor reading while Isaac played his fiddle, the music filling the house with warmth. On Christmas, Isaac surprised her with a rocking chair he had made himself, smooth and sturdy and perfect for the front porch. Eleanor gave him a new saddle blanket she had woven from wool she had carded and dyed herself, the pattern intricate and beautiful. They exchanged gifts and kisses and felt grateful for the life they had built together. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the desert and new foals being born in the pasture. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant on a morning in April when the nausea she had been attributing to bad bacon refused to go away. She sat in the outhouse, her hands shaking as the realization washed over her, and felt a complicated mix of joy and terror. She told Isaac that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He had been talking about his plans for expanding the barn when she interrupted him. "Isaac, I am pregnant." He went very still, then turned to look at her with wide eyes. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed my monthly courses twice now, and I have been sick every morning for a week. I think the baby will come in late fall, October or November maybe." Isaac's face split into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down quickly, looking worried. "Sorry, should I not have done that? I do not want to hurt you or the baby." Eleanor laughed, some of her anxiety easing at his obvious joy. "I think we are fine. But Isaac, this is going to change everything. Are you ready for that?" "I have been ready since the day I met you," Isaac said, kneeling down and pressing a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mother and I cannot wait to meet you." Eleanor ran her fingers through his hair, love swelling in her chest until she thought she might burst with it. "You are going to be such a good father." "I am going to try," Isaac promised. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered through months of morning sickness that was not limited to mornings, and the summer heat made her swell and ache. But Isaac was attentive and patient, rubbing her feet and bringing her cool water, and never complaining when she snapped at him for things that were not his fault. He hired a young man from Independence named Tom to help with the heavy ranch work, so Eleanor would not worry about him overexerting himself. And Tom proved to be a hard worker with a good sense of humor who fit right in. In October, Eleanor went into labor on a crisp fall morning. Isaac rode to Independence to fetch the doctor and the midwife, and Eleanor spent the next 18 hours bringing their child into the world. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, painful and exhausting and terrifying. But when the midwife finally placed a squalling baby boy in her arms, Eleanor understood what people meant when they talked about the miracle of birth. "He is perfect," Isaac breathed, staring at his son with wonder. "Eleanor, we made a person." "We did," Eleanor agreed, exhausted and euphoric. The baby had Isaac's dark hair and long fingers, and when he finally opened his eyes, they were the same creek water green as his father's. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months without settling on anything, but looking at their son now, the answer seemed obvious. "James," Isaac said. "James Michael Garrett, after your father and mine. What do you think?" Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. Her father had not been perfect, but he had loved her, and she knew he would have adored his grandson. "I think it is perfect." James was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at night and filled their days with constant demands. Eleanor was simultaneously exhausted and more fulfilled than she had ever been. She watched Isaac with their son, saw the gentleness in his big hands as he changed diapers and the wonder in his eyes as he watched James sleep, and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. Life continued, marked now by the milestones of their growing family. James learned to smile, to roll over, to sit up, to crawl. The ranch prospered, Isaac's reputation growing as more and more people sought out his well-trained horses. They hired another hand and built an additional cabin for him, expanding their little operation into something that looked like it might actually become a real success. When James was 15 months old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was stronger now. Their second child, a daughter, was born on a mild spring day in 1878 with a minimum of fuss. She had Eleanor's auburn hair and a surprisingly loud cry, and they named her Sarah Rose, because she was beautiful and delicate and stronger than she looked. Isaac proved to be exactly the father Eleanor had known he would be. He was patient and playful, teaching James about horses and reading to Sarah, even when she was too young to understand the words. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the floor with crying babies, and never made Eleanor feel like the children were solely her responsibility. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word, and their family flourished. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. James grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk and his speech and his gentle way with the horses. Sarah became a bright, curious girl who collected rocks and chased lizards, and insisted on helping her mother with everything from cooking to gardening. They added 3 more children over the years. Another son they named Daniel, twin girls they called Catherine and Margaret, each birth bringing new chaos and new love into their growing household. The ranch expanded as well. What had started as Isaac's modest operation became a thriving business, known throughout the region for quality horses and fair dealing. They built a larger barn, bought more land, hired more help. Eleanor managed the household and the books with equal efficiency, her head for numbers proving invaluable as the business grew. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. Panamint, the town that had seemed like such a disaster when Eleanor first arrived, eventually became a ghost town. The mines played out completely. The remaining residents drifted away, and within 5 years of Eleanor's fateful arrival, there was nothing left but empty buildings slowly being reclaimed by the desert. Sometimes, when they drove past it on their way to Independence, Eleanor would look at the ruins and think about the terrified woman who had stood there with her trunks, certain her life was over. "What are you thinking?" Isaac would ask, reading her mood the way he always could. "That I was wrong," Eleanor would reply. "That stagecoach did not leave me in the wrong town after all. It left me exactly where I was meant to be." Isaac would smile and take her hand, and Eleanor would feel grateful all over again for the life they had built together. The children grew. James showed his father's talent with horses and took over more and more of the ranch work as he reached his teens. Sarah developed her mother's organizational skills and kept the household running smoothly. Daniel was the dreamer of the family, always reading or sketching, and Eleanor encouraged his artistic bent, even as Isaac taught him practical skills. The twins were mischievous and inseparable, getting into trouble together and defending each other fiercely against any criticism. Eleanor and Isaac grew too, growing older and hopefully wiser, their love deepening with each passing year. They knew each other's thoughts with a glance, could work side by side in comfortable silence, could still make each other laugh after years of marriage. They had their difficult times, certainly. There were lean years when the horses did not sell and money was tight. There was the winter James nearly died from pneumonia, and Eleanor spent 3 days at his bedside praying for him to survive. There was the drought that killed half their herd, and the flood that washed out their barn, and countless other trials that tested their strength and their resolve. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When Eleanor doubted herself, Isaac was there to remind her of her strength. When Isaac felt overwhelmed, Eleanor shouldered part of the burden and helped him find his footing again. They were partners in the truest sense, and their family thrived because of it. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Eleanor with a trip back to Independence, just the two of them leaving the children with Tom and his wife for a few days. They stayed at the same hotel where they had spent their wedding night, ate at the same restaurant, and walked the same streets. But everything felt different now because they were different. They were no longer the desperate woman and the lonely cowboy taking a chance on each other. They were husband and wife, partners, parents, friends, lovers, a team that had weathered 2 decades of life together and come out stronger for it. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked as they lay in bed that night, Eleanor curled against his side. "Staying here, I mean. You could have had an easier life somewhere else." "Never," Eleanor said fiercely. "This life, our life, is the one I was meant to have. You were the one I was meant to find. Everything that happened, even the bad parts, led me here. How could I regret that?" Isaac kissed her forehead, and Eleanor felt the same flutter of warmth she had felt that first time by the creek all those years ago. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Eleanor replied. "Always." The children began leaving home as they grew into adulthood. James married a rancher's daughter from Independence and started his own horse operation on land Isaac helped him buy. Sarah met a schoolteacher at a church social and moved to Sacramento after their wedding, promising to write every week. Daniel went to San Francisco to study art, much to Isaac's bemusement and Eleanor's pride. The twins married brothers and stayed close to home, their families becoming part of the extended operation that the Garrett Ranch had become. As Eleanor and Isaac entered their 50s, the ranch that had once been just the two of them and 30 horses had grown into a substantial operation, managed by their son with help from various family members and hired hands. They built a smaller house closer to the creek where they could retire and leave the main house to James and his growing family. It was simpler and quieter, with a large porch that looked out over the mountains, and Eleanor filled it with books and quilts and comfortable furniture. They spent their days working in the garden, helping with the grandchildren, and enjoying the peace they had earned. Isaac still trained horses occasionally, unable to fully give up the work he loved, and Eleanor still kept the books and managed the household accounts. But mostly they just enjoyed being together, savoring the life they had built and the love that had sustained them through everything. On a warm evening in late spring, when Eleanor was 54 and Isaac was 57, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Grandchildren played in the yard below, their laughter floating up on the breeze, and Eleanor could hear Sarah's voice calling them to supper in the main house. It was a scene of domestic harmony that would have seemed impossible that day in Panamint so many years ago. "Tell me about the day we met," Isaac said suddenly. Eleanor smiled. He asked this sometimes, wanting to hear the story again, and she never tired of telling it. "You mean the day the stagecoach abandoned me in the middle of nowhere and I was convinced my life was over? That is the one." "I was so frightened," Eleanor said, the memories still vivid after all these years. "I had never felt so alone, and then this cowboy appeared and offered to help me, and I did not know if I should trust him or run screaming in the other direction." "What made you trust me?" "Your eyes," Eleanor said simply. "They were kind, and when you talked about your mother, I knew you understood what it was like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. Plus, I did not have many other options." Isaac laughed. "True, I was your best bad choice." "You were my best choice, period," Eleanor corrected, "even if I did not know it at the time. Do you remember what I said to you? About the stagecoach? You said maybe it did not leave me in the wrong town after all. Maybe it left me exactly where I was meant to be." "I was right about that," Isaac said smugly. "You were," Eleanor agreed, reaching over to take his hand. His fingers were gnarled now with arthritis, his hair more silver than dark, his face lined with years of sun and work and laughter. But to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "You were absolutely right." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Philadelphia to Panamint to this porch in the middle of California ranchland. She thought about the frightened girl she had been and the confident woman she had become. She thought about the family they had created and the legacy they would leave behind. "I would do it all again," she said quietly. "Every bit of it, exactly the same way, just to end up here with you." Isaac brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Me too," he said. "Every single moment." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they remained on the porch, holding hands and watching the night sky. Tomorrow would bring new work and new challenges, as every day did. But tonight, they had each other and their memories, and the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. Eleanor had boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia, planning to start a new life in Carson City. She had never made it there, and she did not care. Because the stagecoach had not left her in the wrong town after all. It had left her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a good man who saw her worth and helped her build something real and lasting and beautiful. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for? The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm. Isaac and Eleanor watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated births and marriages, mourned the inevitable losses that come with age. "Tom," who had worked for them for over 30 years, passed away peacefully in his sleep, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. Eleanor's cousin Margaret wrote less frequently as she grew older, but they maintained their correspondence, and Eleanor sent money when Margaret needed it, grateful she could help the woman who had offered her hope when she needed it most. They made one trip back to Philadelphia when Eleanor was 60, wanting to see the city of her birth one more time. It felt strange and foreign now, crowded and loud and nothing like home. They visited her father's grave and the house where she had grown up, now occupied by strangers, and Eleanor felt nothing but relief that she had escaped when she did. She could not imagine the life she would have had if she had married Mr. Blackwell or stayed in that cold city. She belonged to the West now, to the wide open spaces and clear skies and the ranch that was forever home. Isaac's health began to fail when he was 65. It started with shortness of breath and fatigue, and no matter how much Eleanor worried or the doctor prescribed, he gradually grew weaker. He faced it with the same quiet courage he had shown throughout his life, never complaining, never giving up, but accepting that his time was limited. He spent his days on the porch or in the barn when he felt strong enough, always surrounded by family, always holding Eleanor's hand when he could. On a cool autumn evening, with the stars bright overhead and Eleanor beside him, Isaac Garrett drew his last breath and slipped peacefully away. Eleanor held him as he died, whispering her love and her gratitude, promising to remember every moment they had shared. She grieved deeply and honestly, mourning the loss of her partner and her love, but she did not regret a single day they had spent together. They buried him on the same hill where Tom rested, with a simple stone that read Isaac Michael Garrett, beloved husband and father, 1849–1914. The funeral drew people from all over the region, ranchers and business owners and families whose lives Isaac had touched over the years. They all shared stories of his kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses, and Eleanor listened with a bittersweet mixture of grief and pride. After the funeral, Eleanor remained in the little house by the creek, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, but ultimately alone for the first time in nearly 40 years. She missed Isaac with an ache that never fully went away, but she also felt grateful for the life they had built and the love they had shared. She had been given more than most people ever got, and she tried to remember that on the days when grief threatened to overwhelm her. She lived for 10 more years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. Her children buried her beside Isaac and added to her stone, Eleanor Susan Garrett, beloved wife and mother, 1853–1927. Together in death as they had been in life, the cowboy and the woman the stagecoach had left in the wrong town. But it had not been the wrong town at all. It had been exactly the right town, at exactly the right time, and their love story became part of the legacy of the Garrett Ranch that thrived for generations afterward. Their great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch and hear the story of how their great-grandmother had been stranded in Panamint, and their great-grandfather had rescued her, and how from that chance meeting had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and built something that endured. The ranch still operates today, run by Isaac and Eleanor's descendants who carry on the tradition of quality horses and honest dealing that their ancestors established. The little house by the creek still stands, preserved as a reminder of where Isaac and Eleanor spent their final years together. And on clear nights, if you sit on the porch and look up at the stars, you can almost imagine them there together, holding hands and watching the sunset, grateful for the journey that brought them together and the love that sustained them through everything. Because sometimes a wrong turn leads you to exactly where you need to be. Sometimes getting lost means finding your way home, And sometimes the stagecoach leaves you in exactly the right place, even if you do not realize it at the time. Eleanor Sinclair boarded that stagecoach in Philadelphia, planning to escape one life and build another. She never made it to Carson City, but she found something better. She found love and partnership, and a home that was not defined by walls but by the man beside her and the family they created together. She found purpose and joy and a life worth living. And in the end, as Isaac had told her that day by the creek so many years ago, the stagecoach had not left her in the wrong town at all. It had left her exactly where she was meant to be.